However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls, to the planet. This is Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs, spinning through the cosmos thousands and thousands of miles an hour, and yet it just feels like we're sitting perfectly still. It's odd, and that's what we do on this show. We just talk about odd things that maybe aren't so odd after all. Maybe the supernatural is just that, super cool, and it's natural. And we have a lot to talk about tonight. My guest, Tui Snider, she's been on before. You may be familiar with Tui's work, and I'm very lucky that tonight I have 2 hours with Tui, and I'm going to ask her about absolutely everything under the sun and beyond. As a friendly reminder, open lines tonight in the last half an hour, so just call in the Paranormal Radio app. That number is 855-472-5483. The Paranormal Radio app line, 85 KGRA Live. And of course, you can find us streaming on Facebook, on KGRA or Paranormal Radio, and on Twitter at paranormal_now. You can find out updates for future shows. And of course, you can go to Instagram as well at paranormal now. As I mentioned before, I won't be posting quite as much on YouTube as I have in the past. I will be occasionally posting on IGTV, and it's all for a good purpose, I hope. I just had my first conversation with someone who is going to be a part of this new project that I'm working on. And so it's the first step. I'm excited. It was successful. I suspect I'll be able to give you more news about it in approximately 3 months. I just don't want to jump the gun, but I don't mind teasing you here about it right now. In the news, there's something really interesting things going on. I don't know if you've heard, but a Russian cosmonaut had captured possible UFO footage from the International Space Station. And the astronaut is Ivan Wagner. And yeah, so if you go online and check this out, it looks like as they're rotating over the Earth, the Aurora Borealis is there, and then you see a series of like 4 or 5 lights kind of come in and out. I personally think that it's probably a reflection of the window, right, that he's peering out of. Maybe someone in the background, another astronaut, was doing something we don't know. It's difficult to tell. It is intriguing. What I do know is that there actually is really fascinating NASA-caught footage of what look like UFOs, and I've heard a number of explanations for them. And there's a couple of videos that I'm just not convinced that the conventional explanations explain it away. So I think we'll keep our eyes on this story. It may turn out to be nothing more than a reflection, but what if, right? What if? Also, interstellar visitor Oumuamua could still be alien technology, new study hints. And this is by Live Science. A mysterious interstellar object that crashed through our solar system 2 years ago might in fact be alien technology. That's because an alternative, non-alien explanation might be fatally flawed, as a new study argues. But most scientists think the idea that we spotted alien technology in our solar system is a long shot. In 2018, a solar system ran into an object, our solar system ran into an object lost in interstellar space. I'm not sure who was lost, us or the object. The object, Oumuamua, seemed to be long and thin, cigar-shaped, if you remember that, and tumbling end over end. Then, close observation showed it was accelerating, as if something were pushing on it. Scientists still aren't sure why. One explanation, the object was propelled by an alien machine, such as a light sail, a wide millimeter-thin machine that accelerates and pushed by solar radiation. The main proponent of this argument was Avi Loeb of Harvard University, astrophysicist. And so, yeah, they came to be that they thought they could explain away this object. And once again, it rears its head. And I have to wonder, if if this could be, the official first contact, I don't know. It's fascinating. So we'll continue to follow the story because it certainly will not go away, and it keeps me, on my toes, interested. So with that in mind, on our toes and being interested, I'm going to now bring on the one and only Tui Snider. Tui, welcome to Paranormal Now again.
Hello. Thanks for having me on again, Alan. How you
Yeah,
doing?
good, good. It's so good to see you. I love your energy and your enthusiasm. You actually seem to be publishing quite a bit lately as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it's what the pandemic brings out in me or
Right.
something. I've just
That's
been
a
on
good point.
fire lately. I actually
Right.
just started another book kind of accidentally the other day, and I'm like, whoa, it already have about 17,000 words in. I'm like, what happened? But all my speaking engagements are canceled. My whole calendar's clear.
Yeah.
It's not like I realize, wow, it does take a lot of energy going to events and everything. So I'm just pouring all that into books, and then YouTube occasionally. I like to do a few, I like to go out in the field and do YouTube videos.
Yeah, and not to be morbid, but it's not like you have to social distance in graves and graveyards, rather, very
Oh,
much.
exactly.
So, I
Oh,
mean, you can still get out there and do your work.
it's really actually a really wonderful thing to do, because I know people here, and I mentioned this in the introduction to my book, which is my brand new book. I'll show you. It's 6 Feet Under Texas, and I mentioned that when people find out that I do a lot of research in historic cemeteries, they just instantly assume that I dress like Morticia and I'm obsessed with death. And I mean, actually, I kind of like how Morticia dresses and all that. I'm
Mhm.
nothing against that kind of gothy look, and I have like one of my favorite dresses is that I wear like when I give cemetery tours, has skeletons, glow in the dark skeletons all over it. But whatever. But my point is that I think people forget that cemeteries are for the living, and they think, you think, because obviously that's where we put our dead, but we really, everyone has their own idea of what happens after you die, and that's one of the fun things we love to explore with the paranormal and all the things we do. We're all trying to figure it out through
Mhm.
religion or just our own belief system and experiences. But a cemetery, to me, really brings history to life in a way that nothing else does. Like, I hated history in school. To me,
Mhm.
it just seemed so boring, like this battle and that government stuff. But when you're standing in a cemetery and you're looking at an individual's grave, and then you go home and do some research on them, and you learn about that person, you can't help but learn some history, because you have to take that person's actions in with the context of the time. So for me, cemetery history, I think, is a really good activity. Like, number one, you said, no social distancing to worry about, really.
Yeah.
It's You can picnic in them. It's perfectly acceptable tradition that goes way back to ancient Greece, if not further. Just don't litter. And you
Right.
come away with it gives you an empathy for other times, which I don't think we always get. And I think it's important to have that empathy for other times. Like,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, no, absolutely. So we'll get into all that, but I do
Mhm.
have to ask you, since I have you on
Yeah.
the show,
Oh, yeah.
do you pay attention to news like that, like the Oumuamua, and alien contact?
I do. I mean, I love anything. Yeah, I love, like, yeah, definitely. I'm not familiar with the Muamua thing, though. I was over here going, wow, that sounds kind of that sounds like a Hawaiian or a Polynesian name. I
Mhm.
haven't seen it. I'm like, I made a note of it. I'm taking notes while we talk, so things I will look up later. But that to me is really fascinating. And do you know what that means? What does Muamua mean?
I don't know what the meaning is offhand. I know, Carol Carl, who's on the show and discussed it. If she's listening, she would probably know.
Mm.
Um, so there is a grave that could potentially be an alien.
Oh yeah. Oh boy, yeah, that one.
We have to start there.
Yeah, definitely. I was like, oh, we're definitely got to get into that one. In fact, since I'm writing so many books, I gave a talk about this last year at the International UFO Congress,
Mhm.
and it's about the book that I'm working on. And of course, I'm writing a book because, well, let me back up a little. I've lived in Texas since 2009,
Mhm.
and I moved here because, I came here because of a man, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
And now we're married, and it'll be our 10th wedding anniversary next year. So
Wow.
I haven't lived in Texas my whole life.
Mhm.
And but as a writer, when people probably do this to you, since they find out you have a radio show, they probably say, "Oh, you know what you should be doing, and do a show about knitting or something that's not even related." Kind of,
Yeah.
It's just like, well, you love knitting. Why don't you do that? So I get that a lot. I love people, and I do learn a lot from my readers. Like I get really good suggestions from them, and
Mhm.
but when I first meet someone, at a potluck or something, and they just, "Oh, you're a writer," and they say, "You know what you should write about," I brace myself, because quite often it's like, "You should write a book about this apple I saw one," it's something like, I'm like, I don't know. So anyway, in about 2012 or something, this guy came up to me at some social gathering, and he just was like, "You know what? You're a writer. You know what you should write about?" And I'm like, "Oh boy, here we go. Take another bite of food." And he just goes, "You should write about that little space alien they buried down the road away." I'm like, "What?" I thought he was pulling my leg.
Yeah.
But he goes, "No, no, go home and look it up." So of course I look it up, and I find out that about 20 miles or 20 minutes away from me, in the little town of Aurora,
Mhm.
which has got about a population of 400, in their cemetery, which has got a population of about 2,000,
Right.
there is a little grave off by itself that, at the time I saw it, well, I wonder if I can show you. Oh, there you are. Hey, you've got the photos. Wow, look at that. That's how it looks now. Now, when I
Okay.
first saw it, it had a little carved cigar-shaped craft on it with like little portholes. And I was like, "Holy moly, this is a real event." I mean, at least something happened here to warrant putting a headstone. Wow. So
Yeah.
I went home and I decided to do some research, and I do a lot of my research. I do a lot of newspaper research, and because no one's alive from 1897. And so I went into some newspaper archives, and there's a bunch that I belong to and know about, so that I just dig into. And I thought, okay, I typed in airship
Mhm.
1897. I was shocked. Hundreds of sightings of airships took place in
Right.
North Texas at the time. See, I did not know that. I thought this was a one-off, this little thing. I grew up, the only alien body I knew about was Roswell. Well, that's
Mhm.
50 years later. In 1897, the biggest thing in the sky would have been a turkey vulture around here, and they're big. But
Right.
so I got a little bit obsessed. At first, I thought it was ridiculous. Then I just thought, oh, whenever I would have a little downtime, working on some other project, I just would find myself looking up airships again, just kind of obsessively. And, over the past 8 years, now I have all these newspaper clippings and things, and I've kind of organized them into different types of sightings. But the
Mhm.
long and the short of it is the one that people can go look at, the one you showed that picture of, that happens in April of 1897. And there people the account that was in the Dallas Morning News said that the early risers of Aurora were woken by a loud explosion when a craft lost altitude and crashed and burned.
Mhm.
And they discovered a little charred body in there, a small humanoid body that was, quote unquote, not of this world.
Right.
So yes, that's buried there now. So it just fascinates me.
What do you ha
Where do we go from here, right?
Well, I was gonna say, do you think that that was a completely fabricated story? Do you think it was based, in truth? And if so, how much of it do you think could be true?
I've been all over the map on how I feel about this,
Mhm.
and I've kind of gotten to the point where my goal is just, I'm really fascinated with thinking what it would be like to be in 1897, because some of the accounts I've read, some of them, they're obviously making fun of it. Some of them are just totally ridiculous
Mhm.
hoaxes. Some of them, so but I have sections for each of that. And there was actually a tradition back in the 1800s, and so hoax journalism, I call it.
Right,
It's
exactly, yeah,
different
yeah.
now. It's not fake news. It was different. It was meant to be entertaining, and they would just your newspaper, we didn't have all these different news sources. You didn't like have Mad Magazine or, and like Time Magazine and Newsweek. And, you know what you're getting with Cosmopolitan or something. You're getting a different type of news with each of those. If you go to the store and you grab the Inquirer, you're kind of not expecting the same type of reportage as you would from the New York Times or something. But back then, everything was smashed into just the local paper. So they would occasionally run these stories that would just get more and more outlandish. And one of the most famous ones was the Great Moon Hoax, I think of 1840 or something like that, right around there. Anyway, that was written by Edgar Allan Poe under a pseudonym, and it was really well received because he's such a good writer. And other people like Mark Twain and even Benjamin Franklin, they had, did some hoax journalism in their day. Yeah. So there were some accounts that I thought it was just, at first I thought it was a one-off, and it was just total, spoof. But then I just started gathering more and more. But some of the accounts I've gathered, they really sound like someone trying to describe something that they saw that didn't make sense, but in the terms of 1897. And there was the same fears that we have today. If you see something, you're afraid people are going to make fun of you. And there were some people who very quickly thought it was Judgment Day. There are, they used to report in newspapers. Sometimes they say what the sermon was that week. And some of the sermons would be that this is the avant courier of the end of days, and they'd be talking, because it was seen at night. Yeah, because most of the sightings were at night, the ministers thought, this means it must be the devil. So it's interesting to me. What really fascinates me is the conclusions they made that were based on their time, because all of us are steeped in our time. And me in 2020, I've seen so many movies and I've ingested so much stuff. But like in 1897, there was one account where a farmer was out tending his animals, doing his chores, and he thought he heard a great big swarm of bees coming. And then he saw the great black, hi, Tony, hi. Anyway, so he thought, a great swarm of bees, which, think about it, if you'd never heard a machine before, other than like a physical machine you could do yourself, there was electricity, but, it was not like now. We're also familiar to different, that's a moped, that's a truck.
Right.
So back then, to describe it as bees, I thought seemed very sincere. So, to me, I think there could be something to it. And at this point, I just want to pull back and really examine it through the lens of the era. But what really got me, and one thing that I found compelling, is that it didn't go on. It started in March, I think, and then kind of wrapped up pretty much, lasted about 3 months, and then just sort of was gone. And then I start seeing them reports farther east, like in Louisiana. So I thought that was interesting, because the first ones, before the 1897 ones, they actually started in September of 1896. And they kind of worked their way across America when you start reading the newspaper archives. So that's one thing that I'm like, Now, is this a human inventor? There's a lot of theory. That's one of the theories. Or is this some sort of interdimensional or extraterrestrial? Or are the extraterrestrials messing with us by using stuff that we can relate to in our time? I don't know. There's a lot to play with there. I've been babbling. But
no, there is. Yeah. And I think you make a good point. Literature or language writing is code. So when you're reading these accounts, you have to try to figure out, right, is this just someone trying to entertain, or is it legitimately a hoax? But in either of those cases, you could probably discern from the language itself whether someone is being creative and fabricating something, using the syntax of their time, versus somebody who's trying to describe something they can't understand. Language behaves differently, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's one thing I love about doing historic research, is because it really opens up how words have changed over just even 50 years, even 100 years, the way we use them. Like I was doing another research project, and I came across the word alienist. and that meant, you know, a psychologist and stuff, and just things we don't say today. But getting back to the airships, definitely, it took me a while. I had to kind of get into their sense of humor because, you know, just as we make fun of public figures, they would sometimes be making fun of public figures. One of my favorite things I found was actually a campaign, a political cartoon making fun of President McKinley. And saying that he had all the farmers out there looking for the avant courier of, he had a really clunky campaign slogan like, I am the avant courier of prosperity or something. We would not do such a clunky thing now, but back then. And so they were making fun of it, and they showed the airship and all these farmers looking up for it. So it was kind of funny.
All right. Well, we're going to go to our first break here, Tui. When we come back on the other side, you know, I want to find out from you, you know, have you ever had any odd occurrences, since you're spending so much time near graves and in graveyards, and even just researching? One wonders, you know, do you sort of open yourself up to certain experiences? This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. Hang in, everybody. We'll be right back with Tui Snider on the flip side.
On and again, the signs keep on coming, they point to the end, but I hold on so tight.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Are you still at it?
Yeah, I need more speed.
This baby's fast.
My dad's fast. He's scary fast.
You really think you could beat him?
Yeah, because I drink more tea than he does.
Yeah, right.
You know, pal, it's the tea that makes you go. Oh. Hey, Dad.
You know, kiddo, you have to drink a lot more tea to be faster than me.
Drink the tea that makes you go. Life Change Tea. You may not need as much as Dad. You never know. GetTheTea.com. Log on to GetTheTea.com.
In 2019, the KGRA is closing down its archive vault to be reopened in another format in the near future. This year, you can get all the 2019 KGRA programming on demand on YouTube, Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, and Google Play. More ways for you to stay connected to your contact for alternative talk radio on the planet, KGRAradio.com.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
Lost in a bad way, I've gotta let you go. You're supposed to be so close to me, how mostly it goes to me, yeah. And if you chose to see the most of me, you'd hopefully get close to me.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio, and Tui Snider is jumping back in with us. I literally saw her jumping back in. And yeah, so it looks like we got some responses that there's a little bit of an echo. Hopefully we have that figured out, but you know, we are going to keep on rolling. So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate all the feedback. You can comment live during the show on YouTube. So I try to monitor that, but I can't, you know, see all of those comments because otherwise then I'm not paying attention to Dewey. So, but I do my best. And if you have questions for her, please comment on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll try to get to your questions. But of course, you can call in during the last half hour and using the Paranormal Radio app hotline. That number is 855-472-5483 or 85 KGRA live. So, Tui, have you ever had a bizarre experience in your during your expeditions?
Yes. Oh boy. And I laugh because I kind of had to eat crow. Now, I have liked, I would never eat a real crow, but figuratively. I liked cemeteries since I was a little kid. And when I was 9 years old, this creepy janitor tried to kidnap my friend and I, and we escaped by running through a historic cemetery. So, I played in them as a kid. I think now I study cemetery symbols. And for some reason, I also have that book, which I'll plug right now. I have a book that's a travel guide to haunted places here in Texas.
Mhm.
And so if someone says that, old Joe Blow haunts this bridge, I look up and see if anyone named Joe Blow ever lived there. And I'll be like, no, it was Jim Blow, actually, and, whatever.
Right.
So it's a book that will take you to haunted places. And so a lot of those haunted places end up being cemeteries. But I just didn't like that idea. I'm like, why cemeteries? Isn't that, literally and figuratively the last place, a ghost should be? I get it when a ghost haunts their house or their business that they love. Those are some of my favorite ghosts, actually, the ones who hang out at a business that they love, or theaters or things like that. But so there I was. And so I kind of was a little like, yeah, I'll go ahead and write these up, but I don't really believe that cemeteries are haunted. I don't know why. I just totally had my head that way, but I did. And actually, that's one thing I love about doing research is I don't pretend that I don't have a bias. Like, I full well know what I believe when I go in. Like with the alien grave, I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. And now I'm like, 8 years later, I just can't get enough of it.
Right.
So I went to this cemetery with my friend, and I'm sure some people out there go to Find a Grave. Have you ever been to findagrave.com?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's wonderful. Anyway, it lists all these cemeteries. They even have an app. So sometimes if we're driving on a road I haven't been on, I bring it up and I'm like, ooh, we're 5 miles from a cemetery I've never been to, a historic one. Let's check it out,
How many people say it's wonderful when they refer to on a grave?
I know, I'm so goofy that way, but whatever. I'm just so like, yay, cemeteries. So I was going to Elmwood Cemetery in Mineral Wells, which I've got to say, if you get a lot of bang for your paranormal buck in Mineral Wells. There's a lot of haunted places there, and I've had a lot of experiences there. But I'm focusing on the cemetery. My friend and I were there, and on Find a Grave, they have a thing called photo requests. So let's say your grandpa is buried in Elmwood Cemetery in Mineral Wells, but you live in Montana. You could put a photo request, like, I want to see what Grandpa's grave looks like. And so if I live nearby, I can get a list of these photo requests. So I had printed them out, and it was early in the morning. I was there with my friend, who's a psychic medium, by the way. And she and I were running around the cemetery, and let's see, she goes, Tui, her thing is, when I go to these cemeteries, apparently, according to her, and I've had several psychics tell me this, and I've had a few little experiences as well, that sometimes when I come home, children will follow me home. Like kids in real life, like living kids tend to like me. But apparently, the kids on the other side tend to like me too. And she was saying, they like, I came to visit her once in her office, and the minute I walked in, she's like, Tui, yeah, you got a whole posse with you. What is with this? You got a bunch of little kids around you. Where have you been today? And I'm like, I was just at a cemetery. And she's like, oh man, so she does her thing and gets rid of them all. I'm like, oh wow, busted. I mean, well, I didn't know. So anyway, so that's why she pointed me to this one grave. She goes, you got to go check that grave out and read the epitaph. I'm like, huh, okay. So I go over to this grave. His last name is Dykerhoff, and the epitaph said, the orphan's true friend. And so I'm thinking, wow, I'll take a few pictures of this and I'll try and find out why he's the orphan's true friend. I haven't figured it out yet, though. I'm still looking, but whatever. So I kind of kneel down. I'm trying to frame it nice. You can't adjust a headstone, so you got to deal with the light you've got.
Yeah.
So I'm down, and my husband always laughs. He's like, why do you need 12 photos of it? It's not moving. But I'm like, the light is, I'll delete the other 11. So I'm going down, I'm hunkering down. All of a sudden I hear, like to me, it sounded, and in my mind's eye, I see 3 little kids just kind of off to the right of me. But I physically hear, not like in my head here. In my head, I saw 3 little kids. With my physical ears, I heard children giggling. And I thought, oh, and I stand up and I look over. I'm like, is there kids here?
Yeah.
And I run over to the bush where it came from. And I look all around. I'm like, is there a school nearby? Is there something? It's not. I'm in the center of the thing. And I realize, and to confirm, like it's like 95 degrees too, right? And all the hairs on my arm are just standing up. And I'm like, whoa. So, I would like to go back there maybe and have try and get EVPs or something. But I heard that. I mean, so there you go. I kind of had to admit that. All right, I guess I've made peace with it. I'm like, yeah, cemeteries, and I have a theory as to why cemeteries are haunted. If you want to hear it,
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I started to notice that cemeteries, bookstores, and libraries are quite often haunted, and I thought, the thing about that those places have in common is that they're some of the few places that we get off our devices and we mentally calm ourselves and kind of shut up. Like when you're perusing books in a library, everyone's like, shh, don't do that. I mean, everyone knows that. We all know that. And so I think we get a little meditative, whether we meditate or not. And when you're mourning the loss of a loved one, you are connecting through your heart. And I think that you just get into that space. I think that's why. I think a lot of other places are equally haunted. We just don't shut up enough to hear it. I
see.
I think we miss so much.
So basically, it would be like collectively, over time, all of these people in this space are kind of tuning the frequency of that space to be something that's more meditative or grounded or heart-centered.
Yeah, well, I think we slow down enough. Like it's like my favorite now. I have my favorite type of paranormal video on YouTube. Like since the lockdown, I've had a little more time to look, and I realized, the ones I love are the ones where, they would have missed it if they weren't looking for ghosts. They're like, here, I'm going to show you the perfect way to chop an orange. And it's someone in their kitchen and they're chopping an orange. And then suddenly all their cupboards fly open.
Right,
or like a shadow walks by and they're like, what? And nothing else on their channel relates to ghosts, and they're just like, I don't know what that was all about. But it made me think like how many things, so many things in our life. I'm sure there's times when I'm too wrapped up in my head and maybe something just goes right by me. And it's like, trying to get my attention. Actually, you were saying like tuning. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like fish in an aquarium. Do you have an aquarium?
No, I had a little aquarium when I was a kid. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I have an aquarium. It's just to the right of me. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? There's my aquarium.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, I have all sorts of little critters in there, crabs and everything. But for the most part, the fish don't really pay much attention to me, except for the betta fish. Now, if anyone out there has a betta fish, and to me, like, it makes it seem like betta fish, they're aware of life outside the aquarium and they actually care. They actually look at me. And I think sometimes I feel like maybe when I'm going through my life, I'm like a fish in an aquarium and maybe my higher self or oversoul or deceased loved one is trying to get a hold of me and it's like tapping on the glass, like, and I'm just, did you hear something? Keep going. How frustrating. Maybe that's, I don't know. To me, sometimes it seems like a good metaphor for all that.
Oh, so do you think that spirits on the other side then would be frustrated with us?
I think so.
What is wrong with you? Why can't you hear us?
Come on now. Yeah, I would think so. Like maybe, probably with how people interpret EVPs sometimes, Unless it's a class A EVP and you get those ones and people like project their fears on it. Oh, he's saying something, and I'm like, how do you know? It just sounds like,
Well, I do find EVPs quite compelling.
Yeah, I do too. I love them.
A decent EVP is, clearly a person speaking, but there's a lot of, I think, loose interpretation. People kind of just hear what they want to hear.
Oh, for sure.
When a voice is garbled, you can kind of
It's like
form
pareidolia of the
pareidolia,
ear.
but of auditorial. Yes, exactly.
Well, did I ever tell you about that doppelganger one I had? Did I or not?
I don't recall. Did you?
Well, I had one. This was really weird for me because I was at the Old Park Hotel in West Texas, and it was so lively. Like, I was with 2 paranormal teams that were really good paranormal teams, and they were setting up all their equipment. And it's the type of team where they were going to take an hour before we could do anything. So I was just staying out of their way, and stuff was happening. Like, there was a locked front door. We heard it open, and someone call out a name, and they just go, "Hey, Tui, could you go see who that is?" Not thinking it's paranormal. I go, nobody's there. It's locked. I'm like, whoa. So I went up and I just sat in a spot where I'd be out of everybody's way. And I thought I'll just do a little EVP session. And I had my little recorder. And I said something like, I just wondered if there was anybody, if I had any company up here with me, something like that. And then I counted to 10 in my head. And I was asking questions like that, one after the other. And so when I said that one, like, I just wondered if I had any company up here with me, and I'm counting to 10, my friend Greg down below goes, "Tui, are you singing?" I go, "No." And I know I have kind of a, my voice is all over the place. I've got kind of a sing-song voice, so I just discounted it, like, whatever. Meanwhile, I didn't know that one of the, my friend Becky had put a tape recorder down next to me. And on hers, when I go, "I just wondered if I had any company up here with me," you then hear my voice on her recording. It sounds exactly like me.
Right.
And it goes like, doot, 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 doot. Meanwhile, on my recording, you hear me go, "Do you have any company up here?" Silence, and then Greg. On hers, you hear Greg, "Were you just singing?" So it was weird because it sounded exactly like me. The mimicry got me. I don't know what that was. And yeah, so.
So is that them reaching into our world, manipulating us?
I don't know. It was either somebody manipulating me, or the funny thing was I mentioned it to my husband, and my husband does not believe in ghosts at all. He's really well versed in string theory and quantum mechanics and, all the sci-fi. He's kind of like Spock, But when it comes to anything woo-woo, which is kind of nice for me because I'm always having the woo-woo stuff happen, and he's just like, "What?" So I don't know. It balances out somehow. But I mentioned it to him, and I played him both, and he just goes, "Well, maybe that was your counterpart from the multiverse popping in to say hi." I'm like, "What? That came out of you?" You're usually saying, "Yeah, it was nothing," but it was unmistakably me. That was what was weird. It didn't. Yeah, that was, or like someone imitating me perfectly. And then later they saw me. Like, I don't know what the deal was at that place. I'm sitting in a dark room, as you do on these things sometimes, because there's a lot of downtime on a paranormal
And
thing.
a dark room is always so much better.
Yeah, I mean, it was like 2 in the morning. We were all winding down. All of a sudden, it was Greg again. He goes, "Tui, where are you at?" And I'm like, "I'm over here." And he goes, "Wow, because I just saw you in the doorway, like, go by." And this is on tape again. And when I was listening back to all my tape, and I realized, and he described this, he said, "Yeah, I was wearing a little straw hat. I usually wear hats." And he goes, "Look just like you, maybe a little shorter." And I'm like, that is so weird. So, like, I'm glad we recorded it, because I would not have, I didn't give it that any, I don't know. It was just very strange to me. I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it either. Do you? Where do you stand spiritually or religiously? Do you think there is an afterlife?
Where do I stand? Let's see. I'm actually just been lately kind of collating all the weird things that have happened to me, because where I stand is that I definitively, to me, I am thoroughly convinced that what we're taught is, the consensus reality and
Sure.
what is supposed to be experiencing and what is normal. I had some really wacky experiences throughout my entire life. Now, I thought that by now, as an adult, that they would be cohesive and make sense, but I've had a lot of really bizarre one-off experiences that don't, they don't add up to, like, "Oh yes, this all, now I've got the grand equation, it's 42 and I know exactly what it is." But I for sure know I've had things, apport, I've had objects just appear in my life that, and I've had, so I haven't luckily had, I don't know, okay, so I've had experiences where I heard I was at someone's funeral, and I suddenly I feel like I experienced them afterwards, and they died from a very painful cancer. This was maybe 15 years ago or something. And I had I realized as everyone was leaving, and it had been a really beautiful memorial. I mean, we were laughing, we were crying, there were photos of him. And you know, I went back to get my sweater out of the pew, and no one else was there. And as I did, I looked, and it was cloudy as I was reaching in. It was white and cloudy around my sweater. And I'm like, well, that's weird. And then I just went, Max, is that you? And I got, yes, and I'm free. And in my head, and I was like, whoa, and all the hairs went up. And so to me, that was and then I thought, what do I do with this experience? Do I tell? And I got this sense that he was so happy because he had suffered from this. He'd had like been told he was going to live 8 months, and then he went on to live 12 years kind of thing. But he was in a lot of discomfort. And the sense I got, it was not so much words, but a knowing that, wow, he's happy, he's doing well. And so then at the dinner or whatever later, I didn't know whether I should tell anyone or not. And I finally told his sister about it, and she was really happy because I talked to a few people, and I said, oh, his sister would be very open to that, but I didn't want to, be rude in any manner. But I thought if this could provide her with any comfort, maybe. So I do think that consciousness continues. I believe in, we talk about past lives all the time. I watch a lot of science documentaries and stuff, and our scientists can't even, I love it how the best brains can't even describe what time is and why we experience it the way we do. And so when I think of a past life, I don't say I think I was a monk. I say I am a monk in another life, because I think it's all happening at once. And
So you believe time is sort of infinite?
Yeah.
Or just simultaneous?
Mind-blowing, freakishly mind-blowing. I can only take it a little bit.
Yeah.
But then future lives too. So some of my experiences, I wonder, were maybe me playing a prank on myself to wake me up. Because I had some experiences as a kid that were just, not too scary, not full-on poltergeist, things flying around, but things happening around the house that didn't make sense.
Okay.
And so I think that helped me stay awake, if that makes sense. Awake to the world. I think I fall asleep. And it's kind of something then happens again in my life. There's times in my life where I'm trying to be normal. I've given up on that. But earlier I would try, gonna be normal and have the job and do the thing or whatever. And, and then something just gooses me back into there's more to the world than what you don't fall for that crap again.
Yeah.
That's what it is for me.
Yeah, and I think it's fine. Some people that works for them, doing a 9-to-5 job, you have your career set or employment, and that's what you're comfortable with. You do that,
Definitely.
and then you have your outside life, your family, your friends, and you enjoy your weekends. That's fantastic. But then there are others.
Yeah.
just are dance to a different beat.
I'm not allowed to do that. If it's something won't allow me to be that kind of normal. I mean, I admire that. It's great and everything, but there's something that's no, come on, knock it off. That's not why you're here,
Yeah, but you've embraced it, and you're comfortable with it, right?
I am. Although sometimes I wish I could make more sense out of it. But in a way, there's a part of me that goes, oh, making sense out of it is somehow missing the point as well.
Yeah.
If just stay open. I guess it's just, you can't pin it down.
All right, I have to ask you about this, the Great Hanging Site. What is that about?
Oh boy, yeah. So, in 1862, the governor of Texas said that everyone, all men 18 to 35, had to join the Confederacy and serve. There were a few ways to get out of it. I think you could pay your way out of it if you were a school teacher and had enough students, things like that. But not everybody. This is one of those things where I think. Okay, I've got a couple of things to say. When you study historic cemeteries, you can't help but learn, in America, you can't help but learn about the Civil War. And I got to tell you, I lived in the South until I was 10 years old, and I had my fill of the Civil War. It seemed like all we ever talked about. I mean, there was even a playground fight over the Civil War once when I was a kid. And I was like, oh, good grief, So we moved to the North, and I'm like, ugh, I didn't consider myself a war buff or anything like that. But the Civil War impacted our, that's when we started doing embalming. That's when we started mass producing coffins. That's when we started, so there's a lot. You just can't help but learn it. Plus, more lives were lost during the Civil War than any other conflict in American history. I have a little graph that I like to use when I give talks to show them, like, this many people died in every other war, and then here's the Civil War on the graph. And it's like, so what this meant was we were a nation in mourning. We were a nation grappling with death. And you see it, our attitude toward death really changed too. Like, we went from being like, you're going to heaven or hell, doesn't matter what you do, it's been figured out, to much softer. People needed some comfort. Everybody had lost a dear one. So anyway, and another thing too is people just automatically assume that all the southern states just wanted, okay, we're going to secede from the Union. Well, Texas was a little different. It wasn't a huge slave state. There were some slavers, yes, but it wasn't the primary thing. And I have a couple stories in the book that hinge on this. There was another one where there was some Civil War men who wanted to leave and join the Union and fight for the Union. And I have a thing about them. But this great hanging site just shocked me, because this is an example of that overlooked history or forgotten history. Because, well, what happened was a bunch of, I guess you call them rogue Confederates, they made a little kangaroo court, and they rounded up, 42 men and accused them of being Northern sympathizers. Well, actually, they kind of they wanted their land. It wasn't really, it's very sketchy. There's a lot more to it, and I'm totally simplifying it. And even in the book, I don't go into, all of these 50 chapters are just little samples. Some of them have had books written about them. This one has had books written about it, this whole great hanging thing. But what got me was, this was the biggest mass lynching in American history. And it happened in Gainesville, Texas in 1862. 42 people. Yeah, it was a big elm tree. And I've got an illustration too in my book where just all these bodies, they would hang 2 or 3 men each night until there were like 42 men, I think, hung. A couple were shot as they tried to escape. It was just a horrible, no one's proud of this. And see, that's the thing. When something really horrible happens in your town, there's an urge to disown it and pretend that didn't happen. And sometimes when I try to talk to local historians about certain things, especially lynchings can be very touchy. I've tried to speak to, over in Eastland, there was the lynching of the Santa Claus bank robber, and the local historians wouldn't talk to me about it. But luckily, their local sheriff would, and he was a bit of a historian himself. So anyway, getting back to that, it's this horrible chapter in American history, but it really shows the need for real courts and law and justice, and not taking the law in your own hands. I mean, so that's why I think it's important. I think that's one reason this book is timely. I think that's what makes history timely, is when you learn actual stories, even the yucky stuff that we, if I lived in Gainesville, I wouldn't be going, I'd take my friends there, but I mean, it's not like you're proud of it. It's just that let's acknowledge that this happened, and let's examine why and make sure this type of thing doesn't happen again. But it's been a very locally celebrating, that's the wrong word, memorializing it has been very touchy subject, even now. They try to.
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't want to sweep history under the rug, nor do you want to celebrate, the wrong thing. And there's there's a lot of back and forth with that, especially now in our nation. And having a conversation with someone who is from the South, and I'm from New Jersey, and I live in New York now. The way we talked about the Civil War was clearly quite different than the way it was taught and conversed.
It's nuanced.
Yeah, and for us it was like there was only one flag that we were proud of, and that was the American flag, right? So there was no other alternative sort of history or culture that we associated with it. So for me, that was always kind of a strange thing to try to understand. It's almost like if I took huge pride in my New Jersey flag. Well, not very many people really take huge pride in their state flags, right? It's not something.
Texans really know their history.
But that I think that because the North was the sort of winning side, I think it affected the psychology of it. And in the North, you kind of learn broad strokes of what happened in the Civil War. Whereas in the South, there was a lot of pain inflicted, whether they were fighting on the wrong side of history or not. there was a lot of pain and defeatism, and they needed a way to kind of get through that and get over that. Does that make sense to you growing up?
Oh, totally, totally. I was going to say one thing that I thought was really interesting, and I think people should be thinking about now, is I was doing for Memorial Day. I did a YouTube video about the history of Memorial Day, and Memorial Day is in May, as we all know. But it was originally only for Union soldiers. So it wasn't for the Confederates. The Confederates dead had to do their own thing separately. And the first official military markers were only for Union soldiers. And then they branched out. They were for Spanish American, every other war. But the Confederates had to get their own separate. They have their own separate headstone. They eventually got one in like 1903. So, but one thing I was reading was, so they finally started celebrating the Union and the Confederacy together in Memorial Day. And a lot of this healing took place with people who had actually fought on both sides in the Civil War. And they would get together and celebrate together and say, hey, and these women, it was a lot of mothers, and I come across a lot of editorials in newspapers where women say, hey, this boy died, he fought for the South. But we still lay flowers on his grave because he was someone's son.
Right, yeah.
And just that there was like, let's mend this hate. Let's not be divided. Let's not, and I found that like, wow. And yet, nowadays there's all this red and blue and divisiveness. I'm like, you need to read some of these old editorials where these people who actually had a leg blown off or lost an eye with us fighting against each other, and what they're saying about like, let go of the hatred. And these ladies would get together and, let's just realize we're all hurting. We all lost people, and we're all moving forward as a united nation, as the United States. And to me, it really was beautiful and very, I don't know if anyone wants to see that. It was a really interesting one. It was on my YouTube channel, and I really did a lot of research on it, and I thought it was very timely in this odd way, which, and like I said, I'm not someone who gets into war history, but the personal, seeing how people, their attitudes, I was like, wow, that's mature.
Yeah. I tend to find that, when people try to listen to what the other side has to say, instead of just digging their heels in, conversation can move forward, and it can be much more healing.
I just had a thought. I was just going to say, I often say that historic cemeteries, are open air museums.
Right.
I kind of think all those Civil War statues and things that they're tumbling down, put them in a section of a cemetery, because some of them are in cemeteries. I mean, when I am in a cemetery and I see a Confederate flag on someone's grave who fought in the Civil War, I feel like, okay, you're just telling me something. It's not racist. It's from, that's their battle flag that they fought under, I kind of get it. It's historical context. When I see it on someone's truck, just modern, I'm like, meh, why are you doing that? But in the cemetery, right? I feel like the cemetery, like, once again, it's that kind of history we don't want to sweep under a rug. So put all the statues there, and have some placards that are up, that are zinc placards or whatever, that will stand up, and people can read, like, this, this is what this was, and this is what that was. So we could go, and because you're in that frame of, oh, this is the past. I'm here to learn about the past. I'm not.
Yeah, well, context matters as well. Again, growing up in New Jersey, if you had a Confederate flag hanging in the back of your truck, that only meant one thing. It wasn't Southern pride.
Yeah.
But you go down south, it means something different. And I think that's where this discord and dysfunction of conversation, comes to a head and it just breaks down completely. But yes, you can't forget history.
No.
You shouldn't tear.
But we can, but we shouldn't.
But we shouldn't. Right. But it's very fascinating that I think that graveyards are, like you said, almost like museums, and
they really are.
They preserve history in ways that perhaps a township or a county or a state may have forgotten to honor. But I do have to ask you about this gravesite. Jesse Woodson James, born September 5th, 1847, died August 15th, 1951.
Yeah, so he'd be like 103 or something.
What's going on there?
Yeah, this one's a really wacky one. Okay, so, well, and he's guess what? He is not the only alleged real Jesse James in Texas. There's another one who maybe when I do the sequel to this book, because there were a lot of stories that I couldn't get to, or I was like, this book's already getting pretty hefty. I think I've got enough to do another one. But anyway, so Jesse James, allegedly died in, what was it, Missouri in 1882. But it's a little bit suspicious, and you can even Google this because he looks different. The photos of him in his coffin, and then the photos of him after he was immediately dead, his facial hair is a little different.
Okay.
And he had attempted to fake his own death before, but they didn't provide a body that time, so they weren't able to sustain the rumor, and then he was seen. So
actually, Tui, let's hold it right there.
Oh, okay.
Because the second break has caught up to us.
Oh.
But we will continue this conversation about the real or not so real Jesse James grave. We will find out, hopefully, on the other side. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. Thank you for tuning in every Saturday night, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. We'll see you on the flip side.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Are you still at it?
Yeah, I need more speed.
This baby's fast.
My dad's fast. He's scary fast.
You really think you could beat him?
Yeah, because I drink more tea than he does.
Yeah, right.
You know, pal, it's the tea that makes you go. Oh. Hey, Dad.
You know, kiddo, you have to drink a lot more tea to be faster than me.
Drink the tea that makes you go. Life Change Tea. You may not need as much as Dad. You never know. GetTheTea.com. Log on to GetTheTea.com.
In 2019, the KGRA is closing down its archive vault to be reopened in another format in the near future. This year, you can get all the 2019 KGRA programming on demand on YouTube, Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, and Google Play. More ways for you to stay connected to your contact for alternative talk radio on the planet, KGRAradio.com.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
I try to capture how I feel and tell you the whole truth, but there's too much to be said, so I just leave you small clues. But now I'm bearing my soul, and my soul loves you. Tell me last things, tell me last things, tell me last things, tell me last things.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith. Hanging with me tonight is Tui Snider. And taking us out of the break was Septembrio spelled with Y.com. If you want to find out more about their music, please go check them out and help support them because they are just really, really good people. And I do want to say that Amanda Curran earlier had brought up that the Oumuamua object we were speaking of, the interplanetary object, the name comes from Hawaiian, meaning scout. O meaning reach out for, and mua reduplicated for emphasis, meaning first in advance of, and reflects the way this object is like a scout or messenger sent from the distant past to reach out to humanity. That's really romantic. I love that.
Ooh, I like it.
I do. So, okay, so let's talk about Jesse James.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was kind of spacing out on that. Well, all right. So, whatever happened, 1882, he was allegedly shot, killed, the end, right? Well, back then, if you wanted to move to another state and take up another identity, it was a lot easier. So it could have happened. Maybe he did. In 1951, he shows up in Granbury, Texas, and he's on his deathbed, and he requests that the local sheriff come talk to him. And so the local sheriff came and spoke to him over a period of 9 days. And he listened to his, deathbed confessions, and he really, he claimed to be, he was going by another name, but he said, "Hey, I really am Jesse Woodson James. I came back here because the one girl I really loved was from this area. I want to die here in Granbury." And he gave the sheriff his spurs and his handcuffs, his favorite necktie, stuff like this. So the sheriff actually was a history buff. And so he asked this Jesse James, whatever, wannabe, a series of questions that he, to try and trip him up and see if he really was Jesse James. And apparently he answered all the questions with flying colors. And what clinched it for at least the sheriff was that his post-mortem exam, there was like a burn mark around his neck as though someone had tried to hang him. He had a bunch of, both feet had burn scars on them. The end of an index finger was missing that was similar to Jesse's. He had a tattoo that supposedly Jesse James had. It said Tex Wise on it. And so he was riddled with bullet holes, old bullet wounds as well. And so that really, made it, clinched it for the sheriff. So, but still, what are you gonna do? I mean, they didn't have DNA testing back then.
Sure.
But finally, there was a guy. He took it on as his personal. I think a used car salesman or a car salesman of some sort, and he's just a real Jesse James enthusiast, you would say. And in the year 2000, he obtained a court order to exhume the body and do a DNA test. So they exhume a casket, and right away, the Jesse James enthusiast was worried because Jesse James is allegedly buried in a wooden casket, and what they dug up was metal. And then to make it worse, when they opened it up, he was missing an arm entirely, like, forearm. Yeah. And they had dug up the grave of W.H. Holland, this guy who his arm is actually buried in a separate spot in that same. I've got a little thing. So the chapter before, I talk about his arm being buried separately because that was kind of a thing people would do back then. And I just went on a jag where I was reading about all sorts of arms and legs being buried separately, and people really believed. And then there was all sorts of cases where they were like, my wife said her amputated fingers were bugging her, so we dug it up and straightened the fingers out, and now she feels better, stuff like that. There's all sorts of, I'll do a video about this eventually and share all the research I found because it was really cool. Kind of interesting. But long story short, they accidentally dug up W.H. Holland. And the reason that happened is because people have stolen Jesse James' headstone a few times over the years, and when they put it back or gotten a new one, they kind of put it in a different spot apparently. And so they weren't able, because the court order was just to exhume one casket. Nothing's happened in the last 20 years. It's tied up in paperwork and money and, getting permissions. I think it would be great if someone came along and did it and just tried to, it's kind of like the space alien grave. The local cemetery association will not allow them to. They rather cheekily say you must notify next of kin before you can do that. But beyond that, they really just, we don't want people digging it up.
Do you think the Aurora alien grave, they do that because they want tourists to continue to come there?
No, they don't want tourists. Well, they didn't for the longest time. And even when I first started researching it, locals didn't want to talk about it. But now When you drive through town, which takes about 5 seconds, right when you get into town, the Welcome to Aurora sign is like a crashed disc and a little alien. It is so cool. And now it says like they've gotten into it. Now locals will talk about it more, but for a while there, it was kind of like, it was hard to get much out of people.
Well, look, if going back to that story, if the Aurora UFO crash was a fabricated story, why would you bury something?
That's the thing. And it was the day before Easter, and I haven't been able to find an actual account of the funeral, but the crash happened the day before Easter. They buried it the next day. And that's what you did when you found. I have all sorts of stories in in my book about what they would do when there's someone came through town and died and didn't have ID. One of my stories is about a family of 7 who they were pioneers or whatever, they were traveling through. Who knows whether they were going to settle there or not, but they died. And I kind of go into detail into what happened because they don't know, like maybe they had food poisoning or something. They died before anyone even got to say hi to them and really get to know them. So this family of 7, and so the locals, the women sewed them new dresses and outfits so they wouldn't have to be buried in their death clothes. That's something you come across a lot. And then the locals, they built coffins for them and they buried them. What you do, you give them a decent burial. That's just the thing. So to me, that was another thing because the town of Aurora had gone through a lot. They'd had a plague that went through that if you survived it, you might be partially paralyzed or blind, which back then, wow, I mean, it's hard enough to get around these days with an infirmity, but imagine trying to make it, back then. And so they just were like, we don't know what this thing is, we're burying it. So to me, that seemed realistic because I've read people or have had people say, well, why didn't they donate it to science? Why didn't they dissect it? Nobody was doing that back then. You didn't do that to bodies. I mean, that's why we had body snatchers all throughout America back then.
For scientists.
Yeah, the resurrectionists, they call them. And I've read some really damn creepy accounts of what they did, but that's what they had to do because there was a stigma against it. You were either a criminal, criminals sometimes would be dissected, but these medical colleges needed those bodies, and that's a whole nother thing that I've looked into before. It's interesting.
Yeah, what happens if you get caught stealing a body for medical purposes back then?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, there would be some sort of, you could go to jail for it, but, I haven't really looked into that. What I have read about are riots. The one that really gave me nightmares was, this is so creepy. Okay, so this guy, his daughter died, and he heard a rumor that she had been donated to a college nearby, and so he and his buddies went to that college, and he saw and recognized her hand, and so they came back and had a big riot and burnt the college, and there were at least 17 different college riots and violence where people would find that someone had been taken, and there were a lot of countermeasures that they took. So back then people really thought you were going to be Judgment Day, you're going to need all your pieces. I mean, so this is a roundabout way of saying that it just makes sense in the mentality of 1897 to just, we don't know what this is. Doesn't matter. We're giving it a good Christian burial because that's what you do with an unidentified thing that comes through town.
Do you think that
from wherever?
Do you think if they dug up the grave of this Jesse James, that it would be definitive proof? Would it be worth doing exhuming the grave?
I think it would. That I really think would be worthwhile because there are relatives with DNA that they can compare it to. I mean, although it's a little crazy, he would have to be awfully old. But maybe they do dig up the other one that's in the other town, which I haven't gotten to go see yet. I haven't looked into. Yeah.
No, I don't know how long is DNA stable where you can compare.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, I know that hair takes an awfully long time to decay. I mean, they can dig up people and tell they died from arsenic or they were taking morphine. You can tell a lot of people from people's hair, a lot of things from people's hair. So yeah, I don't know.
It would depend on the environment that it's buried in.
That's true.
I know that they've been able to extract soft tissue from some dinosaur bones.
Oh yeah.
I haven't heard much of that lately, but I would say I
Mhm.
think that came out about 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh.
There was a scientist that she was able to do this. She actually asked the question that nobody thought to ask.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
she
She was
just cut
great.
she
Mhm.
cut into the bones and was like, and
Yeah.
pulled some material out and was like, "Oh my gosh,
And they didn't
there's
take her
soft material
seriously
here."
because she was female, like as I recall. They gave her a little bit. She had to fight against that a little bit. Anyway,
Oh, I don't know about that, but
it's a
I
different
do
gal.
know.
I was just like, wow,
No,
you know.
it might have been. I just remember seeing, I think it was like a PBS
Mhm.
special, and then it started getting traction, and articles online. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if people were like, really?" But
Well,
yeah,
scientists in general, I admire the advancements because I watch a lot of documentaries about
mhm,
scientists and physicists and people who are really trying to stretch the boundaries of our belief system,
yes,
and
yeah,
then you see what they go through. They are ridiculed by their peers. I was reading about one of the guys who came up with string theory, and he went to tell his gosh, I forgot their names now. He was a Russian guy, and he went to talk to like Alan. Oh, I'm blanking on the physics. I can't even say it now. The physicist's names.
mhm.
But anyway, he went to tell this other physicist about his theory, and the guy fell asleep while he was he's turning
Oh,
around from the blackboard. The guy's falling asleep. And so he thought, oh, it must suck. Well, later on, it turned out to be. I think they toured together and learned from each other. But you look at
mhm.
what people have gone through. They've been imprisoned for saying, I think that maybe we're going around the sun, or like to just put your ideas out there and just say what you have observed. I really do admire that.
Yeah, in the paranormal world, scientists do often get sort of a bad rap,
Yeah.
for being, ultra conservative or protective of their work,
Hmm.
or biased because they need money and funding from universities, which are
Yeah.
all, legitimate criticisms. But I have so much respect for scientists, who
Me
are just trying
too.
to do good work, and it's the same thing. Whether it's paranormal or science, I find it so all just fascinating. If I could live another lifetime, I would have probably, if I could have do math better, I, I would have gone the route of trying to find a job working for something like NASA. Whether we do have alternative technology that can fly to Mars right now anyway, and we've landed there, whatever.
Yeah.
But I would still want to be a part of sending probes there and
Hmm.
being part of that scientific, exploration.
I'm always amazed by the math they can do and the thought experiments they can do, um, and come up with that just seem crazy. Like a physicist will start out with just a thought experiment. They're just up in their attic thinking, and then they're doing math, and then they present it to their peers, who then ridicule them because we need, for science, we need a replicable study. We need to be able to do this and have the same results come over and over. And maybe when they come up with this great idea, they don't have the tools to do that yet. And sometimes they die before that happens. And then someone else picks up their study and is able to create, there's a study, and they prove them right. I just, that kind of thing. Just the power of the imagination. I've got a great imagination, but I'm not making any great discoveries like that. But
But you are, they're discoveries for us because you're doing your research and you're sharing it with the world, and it's fascinating. I think the
I guess
stories.
I can relate to them. I can relate to the tenacity of research, and
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of fun.
I recall the story that someone told me, who will not be named, when they were young in their, I think, like early 20s. They were camping, I think camping or something like this, on some kind of trip, and they had accidentally discovered that there was an archaeological dig, going on nearby.
Ooh.
So they kind of like peered through the trees. They could see the dig going on. Blah blah blah. Well, they weren't like crazy drunk or anything, but they were drinking, and they had like bottles of beer. At nighttime, uh, they snuck into this archaeological
Oh
site,
no.
and the archaeologist had recovered a skeleton, um, for the nighttime, right? They put the dirt back over it or whatever, so they can continue the next day. Well, they removed the dirt and they took a label off of the beer bottle,
Oh my god.
put it on the head of the skull, the forehead, and
Oh
then
my
buried
gosh.
it back up again. And then they were quite surprised the next morning when they resumed their dig.
Oh, that is hilariously mischievous. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness gracious, yeah.
Well, have you come across any, just uncanny stories that you just thought were just totally ridiculous?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, well, it's funny. Well, okay, well, we were talking about discoveries. I did make a
Mhm.
discovery in my book. I discovered the true identity of the mysterious rope walker of Corsicana. So,
Really?
yes, would you like me to tell you?
Yes, please do.
I will share. All right, so back in 1883, in the town of Corsicana, Texas, which is world famous, wildly known for its fruit cake, but among other things, they do make a good fruit cake there. They got a great bakery. I'm not being paid to say that. Maybe I'm craving baked goods. But in their Hebrew cemetery, there is a grave, and it just says Rope Walker, 1884. That's it. Well, what happened when I was doing some research, I was trying to, like, I like to do my own research. So, there's modern newspaper articles and things about this guy, but I wanted to go back to, in the day and find some actual timely information. I couldn't find anything in 1884. So eventually I just looked for a rope walker and a one-legged tightrope walker, and I found a guy who had come through Corsicana in 1883. And what he had done was he was selling wood stoves. And to attract attention, he tied a rope between, like, 20 foot high off the ground between two buildings. He strapped a wood stove to his back, climbed up, and then, like, he's one-legged. He had a little peg leg with a notch in it, and he was walking across the tightrope, and it drew quite a crowd. So this was his little scheme. Okay, then I'll sell you wood stoves. But one of the things he tied his tightrope to broke, and he went tumbling to the ground, and the stove landed on his good leg, so they had to amputate it. And now, what everyone has said is, like, well, before he died, he told them he was Jewish, so they got a Jewish shopkeeper to come and recite prayers with him, and then he died. But I found that he had a stage name, Professor DeHoon. It was spelled like a bunch of different ways, because you come across that a lot. If something's not written down, there's a lot of misspellings. And I still didn't have a name. But so, up until now, everyone's just thought, oh, well, we'll never know who he is. Well, I just kind of, shortly before the book was really going to come out, I just kept looking and looking, and I kept searching from different angles. And suddenly I discovered that there was another one-legged tightrope walker out there named Joseph Berg. And I'm thinking, how many can there be? So I find an article from 1869 where he had another tightrope accident where his eyeball popped out and both wrists were crushed. I mean, this guy had been through a lot. And he was in the hospital. I have a bunch of fun quotes where the people he apparently was telling them all about his life story. Well, he said his stage name was Professor DeHoon. So I connected them together, and I now know that the mysterious rope walker of Corsicana is actually a man named Joseph Berg. There, I just sort of condensed a lot of little.
The rope walker. What is he famous for? Why do people know about him?
Well, because it's been an enduring local mystery. So in the Corsicana, it's just no one. And what to me is still I'm curious about is because the headstone says 1884. Well, his fatal incident, where he lost his other leg, was 1883 from the newspaper articles that I found sprinkled all around. So he had been a professional gymnast in Europe. He came to America. He lost his leg fighting for the Union. And then he, couldn't do his gymnastics anymore, but he created this tightrope routine for himself and traveled around selling wood stoves, apparently. And, he died without ID. Now, that's kind of a recurring theme throughout my book is what happens when people die without identification. Different things can happen. In his case, they just buried him and they hoped someone would find him. In other cases, I have a couple incidents, and when I give talks, I've gotten so used to this because I come across it so much. Like 100 years ago, I'm used to what people would do. So I'll be giving a talk, and I'll mention that, okay, this person died, and so they put his body in a chair in the furniture store for a week to see if anybody would identify him. And like the audience would be like, oh, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm kind of used to that's what they did before people had ID. They would be like, well, let's just sit him in a chair and hope somebody goes by and goes, hey, there's Paul, or whatever, which is just so macabre and creepy. And it was usually usually the furniture store, because those would, before coffins were mass produced, they might make them there. They were usually doubled as a morgues. So it's just one of those weird, creepy things that, like, I love how much things have changed in like 120 years. That, you know, that just sounds really creepy. We would never do that now, but everyone has ID, or there's you put them in a database or whatever. So.
Mm-hmm. Tui, we got some comments that it was a little dark and people would like to see you more. I don't know if we can do
Let
that.
me try. Okay, hang on.
Sure,
It's
but
getting darker.
in the meantime, if you want to call in later and ask Tui your questions, you can call 855-472-5483. That's the Paranormal Radio app line, or 85-KGRA Live. Just call in. Bill Skywatcher, our producer, will receive your call. Stand by. He'll cue you, and I'll bring you on the air. And I'd actually really like to hear your own stories. So if anybody out there has a graveyard story or a close encounter with a spirit, a ghost, or entity, I would really like to hear what it was like for you. I have found that when I hear your story, when I listen, when I'm listening to other shows and listening to guests, it's more tangible, and you get a better sense of what the experience was like, rather than if it's written or a message. So again, if you want to call in and ask Tui your question or share your story, 855-472-5483. So Tui, how we doing?
Well, did that help at all? I tried a little
bit, but that's all right.
I knew it was going to get dark while we were on, and I guess I didn't quite realize. Now the cat's going crazy, because as they do this time of night.
Well, I did see your cat in the background earlier.
Did you? Yeah. She's up now and running all around.
I saw white paws. I didn't see him.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your cat does have white paws, right? Or was I seeing something?
Yeah, maybe it's a ghost cat. Woo! No, she does have white paws. She's a little tabby. She's still got her harness on, because I actually put her outside on a harness. Oh, there she goes. She just went running. Did you see that?
She's like, you're talking about me?
Woo.
And isn't it funny, though, how cats kind of do know when you're talking about them? And
yeah.
And they'll just go off a little bit. Yeah.
I wish I had a lamp or something. Oh, well, I guess it's darker in here than I realized.
Okay, so I want to ask you about this case as well.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us about this? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, that is the last scraped graveyard that I'm aware of here in Texas.
And what is a scraped graveyard?
Well, about, if you could travel back in time 100 years ago, 120 years ago, even before that, especially throughout the South, you would find yards that look like that, because nowadays when you think of a cemetery, you think of like a wide expanse of lawn, don't you? You think of grass. You think of, you go there and you see people mowing. You see well, that was here in the South, especially throughout the South. There were what they had called scraped graveyards. And so once a year, boy, my cat's going crazy. She's just going bonkers. Oh, well, once a year, people would have decoration day. And this was usually in springtime, because that's when everyone has flowers growing. And you didn't have florists. So you wanted to come and decorate everybody's graves. And so maybe 3 or 4 days before this, all the men would come, usually from a church or the community, and they would use a hoe and whatever else they had, because we didn't have lawnmowers back then. And you would scrape all the dirt from all the graves, and it would just be bare, not even a single blade of grass. And this was meant as considered to be a sign of respect. This is what you did. But it was also very practical, because it kept creatures like livestock from running through and trampling a grave, and you could see snakes and critters, things like that, more easily. And that sort of mounded grave too was often it would be studded with mussels shells or clam shells.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is that this practice is actually pretty common even today on the Ivory Coast, where a lot of slaves were taken from.
Mm-hmm.
And so some people theorize that, this practice was something that people observed, African Americans doing. And so, it realized that it had a practical application, so that it just spread. For whatever reason, until the late 90s, there were a lot of these graveyards still left here in Texas, and I spoke at a monument builders conference, and which was really neat because monument builders, people who build headstones, it tends to be a family business. So you'd ask one person, they're like, "Let me go ask Grandpa," and they really have a lot of history. And I learned a lot of history, and I got a lot of leads for places to check out. And they told me that the only scraped graveyard left in Texas that they were aware of was over in Denson, Texas, and it's really thick clay soil, doesn't grow stuff real well, but they've maintained that tradition. I mean, I took that picture a couple of years ago, and yeah, but I tried to find other, like I had a book that was written in the 80s, and it told about, here, had all these different scraped graveyards. And so I would go and I'd be like, nope, not scraped anymore. So now I can kind of tell when it's not a scraped graveyard. And long story short, when the Great Depression came, people moved away to find work. So families were scattered. So they weren't able to go back and maintain their family cemeteries anymore. So it was easier when someone else takes over. Let's just plant grass. Let's make it easy to mow. It changed. The Great Depression had this great, the Civil War had a huge impact on cemeteries. And then the Great Depression did as well in different ways. And so now our associations for memorial gardens is different. We expect grass now.
We do. And when I look at this image, it looks abandoned to me. It looks, like it was.
It's not though. There were even some. Go ahead. Keep going.
No, go ahead.
I would say it's not though. There's even some modern burials there too. I took a whole bunch of photos. It was really interesting. It's fenced off, and inside the fence, it's just all pretty well scraped and sandy. And another thing they would do too is, you'll still see this where some people, so they keep the scrape, they would put rocks all over or pebbles all over. And so when I'm in a historic cemetery and I come to a plot where there's rocks all over the entire plot, I'm thinking, I bet this was, this whole place was scraped earlier. And that's why, it's kind of how some people do that with their lawns. They don't want to mow them.
And that's it.
Oh yeah, I can go on and on. I feel like I'm just rambling. I'm like, geez, I'm just going on and on. Maybe I should shut up a little. Okay. But yeah, it's a really interesting practice. I thought it was quite interesting, and they got the headstone, the footstones, the mounded graves, and they. This was in East Texas, and it was the only one I could find. And
does it affect the bodies at all differently if there is flooding, or storms or what have you?
Well, a lot of that has to do with the soil. I was thinking back to that monument builders conference I went to, and they were talking about how, I never go alone to a cemetery, just because, especially a lot of these they are really in remote areas, and you don't have cell phone coverage, and something happens, twist an ankle or whatever. This one monument builder told me that he was like, I knew I should have done it, but I was in a hurry. We were going to be burying someone in this cemetery, and I just wanted to assess it. And he was saying that one that we're talking about, they're very aware of all the soil there. And he goes, I ran there by myself. I ran over to the plot, and he goes, and I went through the old section, and I know you're not supposed to go across, they say don't walk over a grave, and people have all sorts of superstitions about that. And he goes, well, the real reason is that an old pine coffin, you go over, he's a pretty big guy too. He goes, and it breaks, you can go down in. And he goes, that's exactly what happened. He was in a hurry. He was running across, and it went crunch. His legs went down in, and then he said it was like quicksand, wet. And he was just stuck. He had no cell coverage. And he said he was there about an hour and a half trying to pull himself out, and thank goodness someone came by and he wasn't stuck there all night. And so now I think about that when I'm running around cemeteries, because I get excited. I'm like, I want to go take a picture over there, and I'll run, but yeah.
There is a statue of Jesus on a grave that is wearing cowboy boots. Can you please explain that one to us?
Oh, yeah. I love this. Okay, over in Paris, Texas, which is a really fun town. Anyway, I really love Paris, Texas. They have a cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery. Huge, beautiful, historic cemetery. And there was a guy there he's buried there. He's got like a 21-foot monument. And a pretty common Victorian era theme for statuary is to show usually it's kind of a woman clinging to a cross. And that is a reference to the hymn Rock of Ages, which Def Leppard made a song about later. But Rock of Ages, so they have a line in there, to thy cross I cling. And so a lot of funerary artwork shows that. Willett Babcock he was known around town as being this big, jolly guy. He had a furniture store, which was also a morgue, because that's what you did back then.
Sure.
This is the late 1800s. Yeah, come on, we're all used to that now, right? And he made the first opera house in Paris, Texas, and he was really into theater. And people compared him to Falstaff. They said he was just big and jolly, always had a joke. I mean, when I was reading old newspaper accounts, he was easy to track down because he left a lot of memories in people's minds. So he commissioned this monument, and what it is it's kind of a Jesus, clinging to a cross. And his footwear, he's distinctively got cowboy boots on. And people have theorized what this means. I really think it just shows Willett Babcock's great sense of humor. And also, it's just a reminder that back then, if you had a chunk of change, you came across a bit of money, you thought, oh, I want to plan my monument. Nowadays, we get a chunk of change, we think, I think I'll take a trip to Hawaii, and we kind of leave the headstone planning up to our family. Like most of the time, people I know, they plan. They're not as, I know some people do plan their own headstones and epitaphs and everything, but a lot of times it is left up to their kinfolk. And it's just a difference, back then. He commissioned that from the local monument company, 12 years or so before he died or something like that. So, yeah, but it's really neat. It's very eye-catching, and now it's quite a bit of a tourist attraction.
Okay, so we're going to open up the phone lines,
Oh,
the
nice.
Paranormal Radio app phone lines. The listener call-in line is 855-472-5483 or 85-KGRA live. And also, as a friendly reminder, please go to the KGRA radio website and sign up for the Telepath. It is indeed the best in paranormal news. Join our newsletter, subscribe now, and it's really great. I subscribed myself, obviously, of course I would, and it's really fantastic. It keeps you up to date and abreast with some of the coolest and latest in the paranormal and scientific world of discoveries. So I'm going to take the first call here now, and we're going to welcome Ron. How are you?
Hey, Alan, how you doing? Hello, Tui.
Hi,
I
Ron.
had a thought. I have a graveyard up at the edge of town on Highway 30 up here on my small town I live in, what we call postage stamp. Anyway, my residence number is 369 residents in the town.
Wow.
And the graveyard probably has, I don't know, over 100 graves, I would think, just looking at it. And so I walked up there and looked around, and I saw this one family where the whole family was wiped out in the early turn of the century. Mom, dad, children, and I don't know if that was like the Spanish flu or the whatever, or the plague or whatever it was at the turn of the century. But I couldn't imagine that many people in this town at that time.
Yeah.
So anyway, I kept looking at some of these grave markers and the dates and the different things. I just kept trying to think of, wonder why. Why did they die? What happened? And there's really interesting thing about that. And then I started doing a little something. It's kind of weird because I see activity in my house, which is right down the road from the graveyard.
Yeah.
And anyway, I not really that scares me, but just be aware of it. Got to be aware of it. And what I do when I drive past the graveyard, whenever I notice I'm driving past the graveyard, I try to beat my horn. Just say like, hey, how you guys doing? Let them know that they're still dead. Okay.
They're not forgotten. Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, and some will actually get up, and I've heard stories about this, about other graveyards, where people have seen people walking around at night. But now if you beat your horn at them when you drive past them, they're going to, oh, wait, I'm still dead. I need to stay here.
Maybe so.
Maybe. Yeah, it's almost like a lighthouse of sorts, right? Sort of, kind of reminding them. Yeah.
And so if you are going by a graveyard, and somebody might be the caretaker there taking care of the graveyard, but if you beep and they wave at you, you wave back, no big deal. But you do it out of the respect for the people that are there. Supposed to be sleeping, they're supposed to be dead, and it's not being funny. It's serious, And,
yeah.
I do see a graveyard. I see a graveyard and I try to remember, I got to beat my horn, and I do. And I feel better when I do that. When I don't do that, I notice I have more activity in the house. I've had that happen as well. So, like when I don't beat the horn and I go past the graveyard, then that night I'll have a weird sound in the house. I'll have some activity in my house which makes no sense, and then I just got to think that maybe they got mad that I didn't beat my horn.
Do you think that these spirits or ghosts or whatever know you then at this point?
I do. I don't know if they know who I am, or I don't think there's anybody that I could know who they are unless I could try to, have a conversation with them, which I'm not really into that kind of conversation. It's a little scary to me to be speaking with a spirit or a dead person, so. It's just kind of weird to even be thinking about communicating them with the horn. But I gotta anticipate in my own mind that it's doing something because I have less activity when I do beat my horn.
Well, then it seems like you found a technique. I don't know if anybody out there listening has had a similar experience, but I would really be curious if you have. Comment on the YouTube or Facebook page live during the show, or just email me, alan@paranormalnow.net. And if we get some of those similar techniques or stories, we'll share them on the air. Thanks, Ron, so much for calling. Do you have any other questions for Tui?
Thank you very much, Alan.
Thanks for listening.
How has your experience affected your view of history as you research some of your historical graveyards?
It's really given me a lot of respect for what it would be like to live back then. It really puts, to me, I think when I do historical research in these historic cemeteries, it brings history to life to me in a way that nothing else does. I mean, I feel much more connected to history if I'm standing right there and I'm looking at the grave of someone. I go home and look up information about them, and I think of all they went through. It really helps me gain more empathy for them in their time period. So I have a lot more empathy for what people have felt in different ages. Because it's easy when you learn history, you just learn facts. This happened, that happened, this happened, that happened. But when you look into their whole story around this person, and that's why I wrote the book, was to kind of show you all, to try and make you think about all the different things they factored into their life. It wasn't so cut and dry. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to join the Union, I'm going to join the Confederacy, or just different things like that, or what they went through, the choices they had or didn't have. And just, I feel very lucky to live in this time period. But yeah, anyway, thanks for calling.
All right, thanks so much for calling, Ron.
Thank you very much. Great show, Alan, and thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah,
have
thanks.
a good night.
All right,
I think that's neat that he's very respectful. I think in a way it doesn't matter if you honk the horn. I think it's the fact that he has respectful intentions when he honks the horn. I can imagine somebody else going by and honking the horn to be a jerk. You know what I'm saying? Like, ha, you're dead, I'm not. You know what I mean? And that might accelerate things for them. But I think the fact that when Ron honks the horn, he's also feeling, hey, I remember you, or I acknowledge you, or it's sort of respectful. That was my take.
Right. Okay. So the phone lines are still open. If you want to call in, the number is 85-KGRA live, 855-472-5483. And it reminded me, Tui, I do this thing when I'm driving, particularly on roads at night, and if it's wooded, I will sort of put my hand out and try to send out a message to any deer or animal to just please don't jump in front of the car.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Uh-huh.
And knock on wood, that is still it has been effective.
Yeah.
Because in areas where I have family and I will drive, it's quite common to hit a deer or to have a close call.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Gotta
and
have
I'm
your
totally,
deer goggles
totally,
on. Go ahead.
it's totally off subject, but
That's fine.
do you're a cat person as well. Do you have any belief that we can communicate psychically with animals?
Yes.
You do.
Oh, totally. Not just animals, but
Hmm.
with nature spirits, trees, elements, water, air, wind. Um, I've had a lot of weird things with wind. If you want, if you don't mind me telling a wind story.
I've never heard of wind story, so I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, like so. This one reason I want to tell it. So, I've actually started working on a new book, and it's kind of going to just be about all the weird things that I've had, because maybe someone else, it will help them out, because I'm
Mhm.
always looking, maybe else has had this. Anyway, one of my friends, this was years ago, he died in a motorcycle crash, and the internet was kind of a new thing, and I was working in Belgium at the time, and he lived back in Washington State, so I found out about his death through an email, which seemed really weird. And I read this email. It was very short and concise and said, blah, blah, he died today, yada, yada. And I read the email and then I was like, and then I had to read it again because I just went like, must have misunderstood that. Well, it was very clear. He died, but it was just, so I was working in a multimedia company, and it was a cubicle job. And other people would take smoke breaks, but I would take goat breaks. I would just say, I'm going to take a goat break, and everyone thought I was going out to smoke,
Yeah.
but I was actually going out to pet the goats, because I thought, it's not fair. I don't smoke. I should have breaks too.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, totally need a goat break. So I went out, and there was this little, we worked in this building, but right next to the building was a little hotel that had this fenced-in thing with the goat and the dog, and the goat and I just loved each other, and I would bring him like lots of nice, good grass.
Mhm.
And so I'm there, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around my friend's death, and all of a sudden, the wind comes up to me. I know that sounds crazy. And I feel my friend. And
Like
he's
in-
saying, yes, it wasn't, it was like a knowing. It was like, here I am. I mean, the wind came up and stopped, and I felt the consciousness next to me, which
Okay.
I know sounds crazy, but he was saying, I'm okay. And I think the wind actually brings messages. This is my theory. I think it exists, and it gives us messages. I've had it tell me things before. I feel bad that I haven't engaged with the wind more. But but when you look at cultures around the world, a lot of them have names for their winds.
Okay.
Like Scirocco, Chinook, and you visit different parts of the world, and their winds have names. Anyway, that was my big wind story.
So you think that the elements do have some sort of interaction or consciousness with us? Because you think about the scientific age, right? I mean, there are some things that were once not explainable and are now explainable through science. And so the conclusion was anything supernatural is therefore explainable by science. And maybe we're coming to a point now where we can try to stay rational, but keep an open mind to think that maybe these other things, some of these other happenings, are not explained, by conventional science, and that they could well one day be, but they may actually be real. Maybe there is some sort of interaction between the elements or what have you.
Yeah, I've had some experiences with like nature in that regard, and to me, it's that whole wind thing was interesting. I've had. Yeah, when I was a kid, I had another thing with the wind. And you were asking about animals as well. I definitely think animals communicate with us all the time. I think, I've heard people like say things, I wonder if animals have feelings. I'm like, give me a break. Have you ever seen how guilty a dog can look? I mean, the real
absolutely.
question is, when are we going to have enough feelings to understand that I think animals have more feelings? They're more heart-centered and really kind of like we are when we're little. Like I'm very lucky. I have a lot of memories from childhood, and one memory I have is just how strong your heart energy is at that age, and how, you get your feelings hurt so badly because when you're a little kid, you're just bursting with all this heart energy. And we have to kind of learn to insulate ourselves as we grow up, or we're just so thin-skinned. But yeah, so I kind of forgot where I was going. Oh, but I definitely feel that animals communicate with us. One time, this is going to sound a little weird, but my cat that I had before this one, she was meowing and obviously in distress. She was really fuzzy. She was big, fluffy, little fluffy black cat. And I was asking her over and over, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And she was like, "Meow, meow," and just distressed, which was not like her. And I'm like, "What is going on?" And suddenly a picture came in my head of her trying to use the cat box, but being constipated. I'll just say it like that. And I thought, why did I just get that image in my head? Well, she was constipated, long story short. And I thought, that was interesting. I have not been able to, I wish I were one of those people who could just communicate all the time with my cat. She's got me pretty well trained. I know what she means. I understand her a lot, but I'm not saying that I get psychic messages from her. But I do believe that's possible. And I do think that image that came from my cat telling me what was wrong. But I did ask. I asked what was wrong, and I got an image. I guess I was clear enough for that brief instant. So, how about you?
I have never, but I do suspect that it's possible. I have seen some videos of animal communicators that are really just inexplicable, like what they can do.
Yeah.
They would, because you could see the healing of a relationship in real time. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you can be a charlatan and pull that off, but if you are supposedly are, as a cat or animal communicator, are brought onto a site, and then you say, "This is the problem, cat or big cat or animal, whatever it is."
Yeah, I've seen some big cat ones that were amazing. Maybe we saw some of the same ones where the cat, I was like, there was no reason for the cat to behave that way and come over to this person when
it was otherwise withdrawn or aggressive.
Yeah.
And there's an energy they're picking up there. But then they, will say, kind of like we see with human psychics, right? Well, this cat had some sort of interaction or problem with either the previous owner or what have you. And, I'm communicating to the cat that this is a safe place. And then I need you to communicate this to the cat. And then all of a sudden, the behavior changes. I don't know how you fake that.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I had a dog once that was chewing everything up, and my family was like, "Okay, this is it. Tomorrow we get rid of the dog." And I talked to the dog and was like, "Hey, you're going to be sent away," and she changed. And the next day she hadn't done her usual stuff, shredding, and they're like, "Well, she's got a reprieve for a day," and it went on, and we kept her, and she never did it again. So I don't know. Coincidence? She might not have been me talking to her. Maybe she just picked up on the feeling that, oh, they're going to get rid of me. I don't know what it was, but it was interesting. Not something I can prove.
No, I believe in the power of symbolism. So whatever your belief system is, and some people either really do believe in fairies and elementals, or some sort of celebrate them and what they symbolize. But if you think that the wind can be a form of communication, could there not be other elementals and fairies and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I have had some experience with like a water sprite, and I might as well just say it here. I had a tree talk to me once, which was kind of amazing. I was on a meditation retreat. I'll just tell you this one because I hope I can remember what it said. I've been wanting to go through my diary and find exactly what it said to me, but I was at this meditation retreat. We were doing all these lengthy meditations. To the point where, I felt high. When I was in the bathroom at one point, I looked at my eyes and my pupils were huge, and we were all just really in this expansive state. And so, okay, I see we're getting close, top of the hour here, but I'll make it quick. So we did this one big thing, and the lady who was running it. And I was feeling very skeptical, like, okay, so my pupils are big deal, maybe nothing's going to happen. She goes, I want you to go out in nature for 20 minutes and, and then come back. And so I went out and I climbed a cedar tree. Now, I've always been a big tree climber ever since I was a little kid. I love climbing trees. Climbed way up in this cedar tree. And I was watching all these creatures on the tree, like a moth and all sorts of creatures were, bird and ants, caterpillar. And I just said something to this tree. I said, "Hey, tree, what do you? You've sure got a lot of life on you." And in response, I said, "Oh, wow, why is that?" Or something. I can't remember my exact question, but it was along those lines. But I did address the tree out loud. All of a sudden, I was enveloped in this very paternal love. It was like this great big love, like, I love you, little creature, like I'm a little creature. And it said, well, when you live up to your true potential, you provide shelter for all sorts of life, something like that. And I was just like, whoa, that's true. And that came to me from a cedar tree. But, and I didn't hear it out loud, but it came through my head. It was one of the neatest things that I've experienced in my life. But I don't tell people this stuff and I've kept it all in, but I'm putting this all in a book because maybe it'll help someone else. But I have kept all this to myself. And now I feel like I need to come out of the psychic closet. So I'm starting it on your show.
Right.
Or not psychic, but the weirdness closet.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. And I think there's definitely something to it. Do you think it could be your own mind sort of utilizing nature as a tool to communicate with itself, with you, like the subconscious working through, energy at the atomic level? And yeah.
Yeah, I don't claim to really know what anything is. That's, I guess, the reason I just feel it coming out, because I thought by now I would have figured out what it is. Like when I was younger, I thought I would figure things out, and I haven't figured anything out. So I'm just like, other than who Rope Walker is, hey, one out of a million things in my life. But yeah, woohoo, I figured something out. But beyond that, I haven't figured anything out. But I just want other people to know that they're not alone if they have these experiences, and that sometimes also, when I go on ghost hunts, a lot of times I hear people talking about elementals as if they're bad. In nature, to me, my experience with nature is always like the most loving, wise. It doesn't feel like it comes from me. I mean, it's way more wise than me. But the feeling of love is always very nice, and it just makes you want to care for our planet more.
Yeah, absolutely. Tui, thank you so much for coming on again. I love chatting with you.
Oh, it's so fun. I was having a great time hanging out with you. Thanks so much. And if I'm on again, I'll make sure I have more light. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, no, that's all right. And I'm having audio issues apparently on my side too. So it's just one of those things.
Woohoo!
So besides tuisnider.com, where else would you like people to go to find out more about your works?
Oh, well, if they want to drop by my YouTube channel, that's neat. Oh, and if they want to buy my book, my new book is $10 off right now. It's like a huge sale, everybody. Woohoo! It's 50 tales of interesting stuff. I mean, chapters. Anyway, yeah, so it's on Amazon. Go to Amazon and, check it out. And, you can sign up to my newsletter, too. I send one every Sunday, but I sent one today because I wanted people to come to this. So, yeah, anyway, I had a blast, and this was so fun. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for coming out of the psychic closet tonight. I really appreciate that. I'm really honored.
Thank you. I was like, this is the show. I think I'll just do it.
Yeah. Is that something that you think you'll develop or try?
I've started a book and it's just writing itself. I woke up about 3 days ago and I just designed a cover and I'm like, holy moly. And then I have like 17,000 words already. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't help myself. Yikes. This is coming out. It's time.
It's coming out. So everybody go support Tui, get her books, and look forward to this next chapter in her authoring life, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Good night, Tui. Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us once again on Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. I do appreciate you and your support. Thanks for the calls. Ron, as always, I appreciate your really good questions always and comments. And yeah, we should respect the dead, right? We don't know what is going on there, and is that really something that we want to just take for granted? Is that something we want to ignore at maybe our own peril? Oh, who knows? But I think that having respect for the other side, whether you believe in it or not, might just be a safe approach. If you're agnostic, if you're an atheist, that doesn't mean there isn't something there beyond our death. It may not be something that you can put in a religious box, but there might be something there, and I think we need to keep an open mind. So for all of you out there, hope that you will keep an open mind moving forward and join us next week at 8 p.m. every Saturday, Eastern Standard Time. Thank you once again to everyone out there. Live in the mystery. Be well.